You're very welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming in and for your briefing documents. I suppose a lot of my questions have been asked. Like I very much welcome, that the impact of change and the claims under both unfair dismissal and inequality. And I was actually, as a person that I'm working with at the moment, that came up. So that's very, very welcome. I'd also like to ask, I suppose, about. It's come up here that people are finding, that people are finding their WRC. It's, access to WRC is confusing. Access to people's rights it's confusing. Is there any way that we could see, particularly, I suppose, in ICTU, maybe that we could see that? I would love to see included that there's going to be more emphasis on workers' rights centres, maybe citizens' information, that people feel it's okay to access, or, feel it's okay to get information. And can we, and the right to collectively bargain, I suppose, should be part of this. And how can we push that on? How can we, within this forum, how can we include, that, I suppose, the Respected Work campaign, and this is an area that we can do this within this committee, and I suppose that will address some of these concerns around, it's absolutely scandalous that people with disabilities are on a lower wage. So, I think if the EU directive on the adequate minimum wage, if that can be something that we can bring in here, and I suppose I'd like to get kind of a lead from you about how we can ensure that happens in here. So I suppose, David or Rachel, I probably would say to your duty that that'd be my first question, if that's okay.
Sure. I'll kick off, and Rachel may like to add. The WRC, as people have said, some of the law is quite complex. We do training with affiliates, have produced a guide to the Employment Equality Act, etc. But is it enough? No. There could be a lot more to be done. We do think that improvements in collective bargaining and protection for unions in accessing workplaces, etc., as outlined, as you mentioned, by the Respect at Work campaign, is a key issue for us in the coming period. The government is due to develop an action plan on collective bargaining. We've done a very detailed submission to it. Happy to share it if it's of use to the committee in your deliberations. But it would certainly strengthen our hand to have a stronger and legal framework for collective bargaining and accessing workplaces in terms of developing this work in terms of protecting against workplace discrimination, etc. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. Andrew, I just want to commend you as well. It's not easy to coming into a committee here, so well done. And I think I'd ask, like Rory as well. Like I worked, I suppose, within the area of child protection in social work. It was TUSLA-funded organisation. And I'd love to see, what would you think? I think any new parent should be getting support, from a public health nurse, from whatever support they need. It doesn't. And I'd love to see as well, how would you think we could change that you felt discriminated against, and I've no doubt you are, but how would you think that we can, I suppose an actor of the state like TUSLA, they are there, they should be there as a support, and I'd love to see how you would think that we could,
So, yeah, I think we do many classes in Trinity with social work students, and we always say the stigma surrounding social workers, and in the past, I feel like if there was more good news in the newspapers, which what good work social workers can do instead of just bad news, changing the name social workers to support workers. I felt like in the past there's only been bad news about social workers in the newspaper, and it never gets highlighted what good they do. So that could be an area in which can change. When we're speaking to the students, you'd never see that online, you'd never see it in the newspapers, because we bring a real life approach to what people that are living in poverty or facing discrimination are facing when they hear a social worker is coming to their house. But then we also took the approach of what the social worker is facing. We don't know how scared or afraid going into the community they can be. So, yeah, more good news, and I feel changing the name. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, and could I just ask about, you know, like Ireland, I know it's the worst disability employment gap. How is that determined? Like, how do we compare with other countries? Does that take in, we'll say, access to work? Does it include transport? Does it include housing? Does it include I'm just wondering how the term came. Like, how is it measured? You know, how? If I could ask you, Emer or Meredith, please.
Sure. The gap as measured is fairly simple. So we know the number of adults in Ireland with a disability. In the last census, it was 1 in 5 people, about a little over 20%. And we know, and every country knows the number of adults with disabilities, the number of those adults who are in employment versus the number of adults in general population versus the number who are in employment. So it's a fairly simple gap to calculate on that basis. It doesn't take into account, for instance, in Ireland, many people with disabilities aren't looking for employment. For various reasons, but they would still be counted in the employment gap, but they wouldn't show up in Ireland's unemployed numbers because they're not currently seeking employment. Okay. They're living on social welfare or living with family. But the gap calculated by the EU takes into account all adults. So the EU average is about 50% of adults with disabilities are in employment, whereas Ireland's average is about 30%. So that's quite a gap. But yeah, it's calculated on that basis. Obviously, as I said, not everyone's looking for work. Some people have been discouraged from looking for work. Some people have given up. Some people feel they can't work in the current environment, and some people might not feel they can work at all. So the unemployment numbers in Ireland wouldn't fully capture all people with disabilities who aren't working at the moment, but possibly could if the conditions changed.
Yeah, that's great. No, thank you.
Thank you very much.